All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Trevor Page, and I'm going to be pulling you, or rather putting you through this little tutorial on how to set up your Hibernate project, I suppose you could call it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the initial sort of annoying setup steps because it really translates better in a video rather than just in a blog post or via audio. I'm going to show you exactly what you need to do to get up and running. Now, the prerequisite here is that you need to be using the Spring Tool Suite, okay? Spring Tool Suite, it's available for free well, you can just Google Spring STS. So if I go into my browser and I say Spring STS, you'll see it available here, spring.io/tools. You can go there and grab whatever version it is that is pertinent, or rather relates to your particular operating system. I'm using Windows, so Windows shows up here. Again, you want the Spring Tool Suite, not the Groovy Grails Tool Suite. So I'm going to download that one. I actually go ahead and click on download, and I actually grab, or rather, sorry, I say see all versions. Let me cancel that download. I say see all versions, and I actually get the one that is based on Eclipse 4.3.2, and I get the Windows 64-bit version because I'm using a 64-bit operating system. So I download the executable file. All right, so that's what I do, and that's the Spring Tool Suite that I'm currently using, which is version 3.5.4 or something like that. 3.5.1 is the release that I'm working on right now. So that's how you grab the Spring Tool Suite. You install it, and this is essentially what you're going to get. If you want more information on how to install this tool suite, then you can go to javavideotutorials.net, and you can see the first video I have there goes in depth on how to install this software. All right, so bypassing all that stuff, let's talk about how to install our Hibernate enabled application. So what I do is I actually go and I say File New, and I create a new Spring project. All right, and inside of the Spring project, I go to the Simple projects. There's a bunch to choose from. I mean, if I expand all these out, you'll see that you have a bunch of different options inside of all of these folders. But basically what I want is a simple project, and I'm actually going to create a simple Spring Web Maven project. Now, if you're following along with this video, with the blog post that goes along with this video and the podcast episode, then you know exactly what I'm talking about here. If you're not, I would highly suggest going to howtoprogramwithjava.com/session 50. I'll put a link to that. If you're watching this as a YouTube video on YouTube, you'll see in the description I'll have a link back to this blog post / podcast episode. But this actual video is sort of a supplemental material for the blog post and for the podcast episode. So I'd highly recommend reading through the blog post and listening to the podcast episode if you're really interested in learning how to set up your Hibernate tools or tool package or project, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to use the Spring Web Maven project, and I'm going to give it a name. Let's call it, let's say, example project for now, like so, and I'm just going to say finish. So it's going to set up everything that I need initially for this Spring Web Maven project. Now, one thing that you may have received that I didn't see here on my screen, it may come up with a dialog saying, "Can you want to install or download all of the appropriate files?" And I would say yes. You need to download all the files that don't exist on your computer that go along with the installation of or the creation of this project. So the first thing that I do, and I'm not sure because this is the second time I'm doing it. I did it once just to make sure everything worked. But the first thing I try to do is make sure this is indeed a web-enabled project. If it's a web-enabled project, that means I will be able to left-click on the project and drag it down into the servers area and release it. But you see right now my cursor is sort of the whatever that sign is, the something's not working sign, the do not whatever sign. So that means that if I let go, it's not going to deploy my application to my server. So I need to tweak it. So usually what I do here is I go and first I refresh it to make sure that all the files that are in there, that should be in there, are in there, and then I try to deploy it. You see that it's not working, so I go and I usually right-click and say Run As, and I say Maven install. So I have these options available because I chose to make this a Spring Web Maven project. So since I made it a Maven project, I can do a Maven install. And what that does is it goes and further downloads even more files that may be missing, and it does some magic behind the scenes. And then again, I do a refresh to make sure that everything that should be in there is in there. And then I go to try to deploy it. Now you see that it's still not happy with me. It's still not wanting to deploy. So there's still some stuff that I need to do to get this up and running. Now this is always the painful part of creating a new project, and I guess it's something that you can't really get around. So before I try to get further into trying to deploy the project, I want to get more into the files that I need to create in order to make this a Hibernate specific project. Okay, then we'll get to deploying it a little bit later. All right, so what I need to do here is I need to first inspect my, let's create our first package. So I'm going to go to my source main Java folder here, which is my main folder for where I put my source code, and I'm going to create a new package. So I'm going to say file, or I'm going to right click and say new. I'm going to say package, and I'm going to name it based on standard naming conventions that we use to create our packages, which for this is going to be, you take the actual website where it's going to be live on. Now this project isn't actually going to be live anywhere, but let's say I put it on my howtoprogramwithjava.com website. You take your domain name and you flip it in reverse. So you put the com first, then you say .howtoprogramwithjava, and then you give it the name of essentially the project that you're going to be creating, which we'll just call it example for now, and we say finish. So that's going to be sort of our base package where we're going to be creating files inside of. Now the one thing that I want to do here is I want to create a configuration file for Hibernate. Now, before I can create an actual file for Hibernate, I need to make use of Maven in order to sort of pull in some Hibernate-specific stuff. Okay, so if I want to use Maven's a little bit tricky. You need to go down to the POM file, the POM, which stands for Project Object Model file. Okay, Project Object Model, kind of a tongue twister. Double click on it, and depending on what you're using, it could open in a view kind of like this, but what I like to do is I just like to go to the raw XML file. So I go to my pom.xml and click on it. There's a bunch of different ways to look at this file, because all this really is an XML file that actually looks like this. Okay, this is the actual contents of the XML file. But there's a bunch of different ways to look at it. You can use the overview. You can look at the dependencies that you have in there, dependency hierarchy. So there's all these different ways to look at it. But I find the easiest for now is just to use the pom.xml. That's what I like to do. And I look to see what dependencies are already in here. So as you can see, we've got some web dependencies, which makes sense because this is a Spring Web Maven project. I obviously see Spring in there. I see Hibernate is already in there already, which is great. I want to see Hibernate in there because that's what we're going to be using. Some logging stuff and some testing stuff with JUnit. Fair enough. So then you see those are the properties that we're bringing in, and then there's the dependencies on those properties, which is the Spring MVC, other dependencies, Spring, etc., Hibernate, test stuff, whatever. So what I want to be doing is I want to bring in a bit more than just the Hibernate entity manager, because as you see here, they have the what was this called? Maven breaks down their dependencies with 3 different sort of tags. One is a group ID, the artifact ID, and the version. The group ID here is org.hibernate, and I believe that's where all the, or at least most of the Hibernate type files will reside, in the group ID org.hibernate. But the artifact IDs are what changes. So I'm actually going to copy paste the dependency and format it nicely, like so. And then I'm going to change this to be Hibernate Core, because I believe that's one of the packages that I need in order to work with Hibernate. Now, I need to confirm that. Usually I would confirm that by looking at examples on the internet of other people who have created Hibernate projects, but I've actually already done that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and show one of my projects. I'm going to unfilter the projects that I've already created, and you see I've created an address book project here. I'm just going to expand it, and I'm going to go and take a peek at my POM file, POM file, and take a look at the Hibernate dependencies that I've brought in. All right, I'm just going to double click on that and go to the POM and go down to Hibernate. So as you see here, I did indeed just have the entity manager and the core, which is Hibernate-core, and they both go back to the Hibernate version that I've defined above, which should be under Hibernate.version, which is right here. So I'm using version 4.2.1.final is the release that I am using. Okay, so that's great. That is what I need for Hibernate. So I'm just going to go ahead and close back down that address book project. I probably will refer to it back to it later, just because it's makes my job a lot easier. So now we sort of brought in some of the Hibernate stuff that we need to get what it is that we need going with our Hibernate work. But now, like I said, I want to go back and I want to create an actual configuration file. So Hibernate, in order to get it up and running, there's this annoying first step, which is the setup step for Hibernate, which is kind of like a set it once and forget it. Once you set it up once and it works, then you should be able to mostly forget it for the rest of the lifetime and life cycle of your project until you want to add more stuff or features or tweak things. But generally, most of the work and heavy lifting happens at the very beginning, which is what we're going to do now. So what I want to do is I want to create a new file. I'm going to create a new class file, just a new object, and I'm going to call it my persistence config file. Okay, you can name it whatever you like. You can name it Hibernate config. You can name it Hibernate configuration. It really doesn't matter what the name of it is, but I'm just going to call this persistence config, and I'm going to say OK, finish. And I'm going to start to put in a lot of annotations. Okay, these annotations are what are necessary to create my configuration for this entire project. Okay, we need to set up our actual configuration to configure our Hibernate to work properly. Now, I could go through these one after the other individually, or I could just go into my address book project, and I have already created one of those files. So for the sake of being quick here, I can take a look at what this persistence config file looks like. So I have all these annotations at the beginning. I can copy and paste them in. All right. Now, what you see here is the @configuration annotation, and you can hover over it and actually see what it is that allows you to do. Okay, it indicates that a class declares one or more bean methods and may be processed by Spring Container to generate the definitions, blah, blah, blah. So this allows you to work in tandem with Spring to make this sort of, it scans this actual file for configuration type stuff. We can enable transaction management, which is important when you're dealing with Hibernate. You can specify where a properties file is, because we're going to be referring to properties that actually exist in the class path. I'll show you that in a second. And we want to also tell it where to scan for for components. For these mostly are things like DAOs and whatnot that you're going to use when you're creating your Hibernate files and you're accessing to the actual database itself. So in any case, I don't want to get too deep into all of the meanings of all these different annotations. I'm certainly going to do that in later tutorials. But for now, I just want to get it up and running with Hibernate. So this is kind of a basic setup, a generic setup that you can use to get yourself up and running with Hibernate. So I can actually just copy all of these beans. Okay, these are all declared as beans that Spring will use to create Hibernate and wire itself in with it and make it work nicely on your computer with your database and your setup. Now you see here, as soon as I paste it in, there's some issues with some imports. So let me just do a Control-Shift-O, which will do an automatic import, and I'm going to say save, and get as many of those issues fixed as I possibly can. And as you see here, there are still issues that need to be fixed. We have, these files that it can't find these files, like the Hibernate Transaction Manager, the basic data source, the local session factory bean. Okay, so these are likely all because we haven't imported the appropriate libraries in yet in our actual project. Okay, so this all goes back to the Maven stuff, the project object model. This is where Maven comes in handy and allows us to import and download and import in our dependencies, our libraries. Okay, so again, let me go back to my address book and let me go to the POM file for the address book and take a look at some of the dependencies that I will be missing, or I am missing rather. So let's see here. I know that I'm missing the connector file, but I'll talk about that later. I won't grab that just yet. Let me see what else I am missing. Okay, so I know one is the Apache Tomcat. Okay, so I use the Apache Tomcat server to be able to do some stuff. And if you go here, I believe it ties in with a basic data source. I believe that's part of the Apache Tomcat. Or is that correct? Am I completely lying to you? Let's double check. Let's pop this in here and see what this resolves. Let's go to other dependencies and paste it in here. Doesn't matter where you paste it, but I just like to kind of, abide by their sort of formatting for this file, the POM file. So when I paste it in, hopefully it'll actually resolve some of these issues. So now when you see when I hover over the basic data source, previous to me pasting in the stuff in the POM file, when I hovered over this, it didn't know what to import. But now when I hover over it, I can actually import based on the org Apache Tomcat dbcp package. Okay, and again, that's org Apache Tomcat, which I just pasted in, which is here, org Apache Tomcat dbcp artifact ID. Okay, so this is where Maven has actually gone, and it should and it will download the appropriate files. I've already done it, so you actually don't see it happen. It's already it's already on my hard drive. But when you do that and you paste it in and save it, it will actually spend a little while to download some files, which is kind of neat. And now I can actually go and import the basic data source, thus resolving that particular issue. Okay, and now we're just going to play that exact same game when we're going through all of these other issues here. So the local session factory bean and the transaction manager, and I think that's it. It's just the two, local session factory and Hibernate transaction manager. If I'm not mistaken, these come from Spring. I can double check and see if we're missing something from Spring. Let me see. So you've got some Spring frameworks here. So we have the Web MVC. Oops, I have it in here twice. That's actually a mistake. I shouldn't have it in there twice. That doesn't make any sense. Again, this is the POM file for the address book, which is a project I've already created once. So let me go back to the regular file that I have, which I'm showing you. So you see there's only the one dependency. So we're missing two dependencies, it looks like. We're missing Spring Context and Spring ORM, which makes sense. So let's copy those dependencies and paste them into our POM file. Okay, format it up so it's nice, and save. So now once we've saved it, it should recognize, there we go. So now you see we can import the local session factory bean, and you see there's actually two different ones, one for Hibernate 4 and one for Hibernate 3. Now those are versions of Hibernate, okay? The latest one out right now, as of the recording of this video, is Hibernate 4, so that's the one I'm going to be using, Hibernate 4. So I'm going to click on that one to import, and hover over the transaction manager. Same thing here. I have a choice of Hibernate 3 or 4. I'm going to choose Hibernate 4. And there we go. So now I can save, and we have successfully created our persistence config file. Fantastic. So that's sort of step one with getting your project configured to use Hibernate. Now the second thing is you can't use some of these things, some of these project paths, because they're going to be specific to my project. So you'll have to sort of tweak it to be specific to your own. As you can see here, it's referring to the com.howtoprogramwithjava package, which is great. I have com.howtoprogramwithjava package over here that I've actually created. But then it refers to address book and persistence, which I don't have over here. So I need to tweak that to look at example, because example is the package that I've created. And I can go ahead and let me delete persistence for now. And let me change this one down here as well to be .example. And save that guy, and scroll down, see if there's anything else. Nope, that's great. Now the next thing that we need to look at is the actual properties. So you see here that it's creating a data source, which is what we use to connect to our database, which is great. But it's pulling in some properties based on these sort of property names, which we haven't defined yet. Okay, it looks like it's fine here, but if I run this, it's going to say, hey, where the heck is this properties file? And rather, up here, it's going to say, where the heck is this property file? Because we haven't created it yet. There is no persistence mysql.properties file on the class path. Okay, we haven't put it there yet. And maybe I can prove that. Can I deploy this project yet? So first, before I can prove it, I need to figure out the problem with why I can't deploy my project. Let me go to Maven, and let me say update project. Maybe that's the key. So before I was going to run as Maven install, so maybe I need to go to Maven and say update project, and just sort of force it to update my example project. I'm going to say force update of snapshots. I'm going to check everything else except for the offline option, say OK, and let it sort of do its thing. Building the workspace now, and done. And let me see if I can deploy it now. There we go. So now I can deploy it. See how my cursor is no longer sort of the do not enter sign, that it turns into a cursor with the little rectangle. Now I can deploy it. So that was the missing piece, was going to right click on it and say Maven and update project. Again, these are just the stupid little things that you need to do once when you create a new project, and I haven't written down the whole process yet. I'm not organized in that manner, so I keep forgetting what it is I need to do to be able to deploy my project. So, in any case, I've deployed it, so now I can actually start my server. So when I start my server, I wonder if there's going to be any errors related to my properties file. So I see there was an error. I can scroll up, and it said failed to start. Does it give me any specific issue? It says class not found, Spring Framework. So it looks like if you're getting class not founds and no class definition found error, these types of errors are mostly due to the fact that you probably are missing some files in your POM file. You're missing some dependencies. So let me go back and let me say stop to stop my server. And let me go back and see if there's any others that I am missing. So I grabbed all my Spring stuff. I believe my MySQL connector I'm missing, so let me grab that, because I think I referred to the MySQL connector in my persistence config. Let me close down my persistence config from address book. There we go. Do I refer to that anywhere in here? Well, probably no. Let me see. No, probably not yet. So I'm wondering what that is complaining about. Let me skip that for now, just because I want to talk about that a little bit later. Let me see. Spring transactions. This is the beauty of programming on the fly. This is what all programmers go through, this annoying process of trying to figure out where the problems lie. So we have our two hibernates, which is okay. We have those two as well. I've already imported the Tomcat. And then there's just the test artifacts, which I think don't really matter for this scope of this project. One thing I like to do is change it to Java 1.7. I doubt that'll make a difference. Let me just start it up again and just have a look and see if it makes any difference. But other than that, I think perhaps it is the dependency on... Nope, there we go. It was the Java 1.7 was the problem. Let me just switch that back to Java 1.6 and see if that I can recreate the issue I was having before. So I changed it back to Java 1.6. And of course, I can't recreate the problem. So it's just one of those things where, who knows what the heck that problem was. I don't think I changed anything in my file. But there you go. There you have it. It's just one of those strange little errors that pops up. But I do like to have Java 1.7 just because I'm dealing with Java 1.7 right now. I haven't upgraded to Java 1.8 just yet, Java version 8. But that'll be a future tutorial series. So let me just start my server up again, make sure it starts without issues. Cool, looks like it has started without issues. I know it has started without issues because I don't see any stack traces of any errors anywhere. So now I should be able to go and go to localhost 8080 and see that my server is running, and the TC server is there. The VMware TC server is running. Fantastic. I might even be able to go to example project and hit enter, and hopefully it'll... Yeah, there you go. So it creates shows you this very, very basic website that says welcome, and click to enter, and you can click on it, and well, then you get a 404 error because it doesn't have, I don't have a controller set up for this particular file, so it just shows this 404 error. But that means that everything is configured correctly in terms of our normal project. Now, one thing I did not see is that it did not complain about what I thought it was going to complain about with the missing persistence file. So fair enough. You live and you learn. It's not complaining, whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this persistence MySQL properties file. All right, so now if you haven't already guessed it, I'm creating my Hibernate setup and tying it into MySQL, which is a type of database. You can use Hibernate with any database platform, any popular one. You can use Microsoft SQL Server, you can use PostgreSQL, you can use Oracle, any of the big boys you can use. I just choose MySQL because it's nice, it's free, it's open source, and it gets the job done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this persistence file. All right. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to create it on my class path, my source main resources location. I'm going to right click here, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to create a new file and call it that. I'm going to paste persistence MySQL properties file. Boom. Now, what you see here, the indication here is that you probably should have these defined in there. Okay, your JDBC driver class name, your JDBC URL, username, and password. So I can actually, if I want to, I can copy paste each of these into my persistence properties file. Okay, copy, paste, and I can actually set these all up in this file. And the sort of the syntax for a properties file is you define sort of the key, which is all these that I've pasted in. These are all sort of keys, property keys. And I say equals, and then I give it the value. Okay, and then I type in the name of the actual class name for this particular driver. Now again, to save time, I've already created this file, so I'm going to go into my existing address book, go to my resources, and go to my persistence MySQL properties file, and there we have it. So I'm going to copy and paste this in, and there you have it. So these are just sort of comments. You don't even really need these. These don't do anything for you at all, except for sort of, add a comment to your properties file. But as you can see here, I have my driver name. Now this has to be correct. You have to have and specify the correct driver class name. There's different ones for every single type of database. So for MySQL, this should be what you need for MySQL. Jeez, I'm jumping all around here. This is what you need for MySQL. Generally, the URL to connect to your database is this one, jdbc://MySQL, localhost, port 3306, / and then you put in the name of your database. Okay, so this particular thing here is the name of my database. Your database name. Okay, so hopefully you've already gone through and learned a little bit about SQL and you know how to create a database. Okay, I've already done that. I've created a database called test123. Okay, so that's why I'm putting that in there. Now what I have here is my username and password. The username I use is just root. The password I have here, I have sort of blurred it out so you can't see it. But obviously it's going to be the password for whatever you have set it to, right? It's your database password. So fantastic. And then I have also specified my Hibernate dialect, which is, again, one of those things that you just need to paste in. It's a set it and forget it type thing, as well as some other properties, which I don't want to get into right now because they're not pertinent to understand just yet. All right, so there you go. We've set up our properties file. I can close that down. Let's see, what else do we have that we need to do? So now when they actually go and it actually runs this code, it's going to grab, based on that key, it's going to grab the jdbc.driver class name, and it's going to substitute it with the actual name of the driver class itself, as well as grab the actual URL and the username and the password that we actually specified and set it into our data source object. Okay? So that's cool. That's exactly what we wanted to do. And then same for down here. We've specified these properties here, the Hibernate, blah, 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 auto, the dialect, and whatnot. That will grab those properties as well and sub them in for these particular Hibernate properties. All right? Cool. So that sort of concludes the initial setup phase for our Hibernate stuff, if you will. So we've created our persistence config file. We've created our properties file. And is there anything else that we need to do before we go forward? Well, I guess we can always copy paste in the last piece of the puzzle, which is the Hibernate or the MySQL connector. So this is also something that you're going to need, again, if you're using specifically MySQL database, then you're going to need the MySQL connector. And this is good because it allows you to interface. It's like a driver. It allows you to interface with MySQL properly when you're working with your Hibernate and Java project itself. It's just one of those things that you need in order to be able to have them talk to each other properly. So I'm going to be sure to copy and paste that into, let's put it into, I guess, the other dependencies. Okay, not exactly a web dependency, but whatever. I'll paste it in there. Again, it doesn't really matter where you put it. You can just paste it in there, and then we should still be able to start up our project properly. I will restart the server and make sure that everything is still a-okay. And as long as it starts properly, then we are good to go. So that's sort of the initial setup phase for how you go about creating, or at least setting up your Hibernate project. Okay, so in the next podcast / blog post / maybe video, I'm going to be talking about how to create, well, these things up here. If you look at my example project, I've created my DAOs. So I create an actual data access object as well as an actual file that I use to represent an actual table in the database, which is actually an object in Java, and how to hook this up so you can actually create the table as well as populate it with rows and read the rows into something like a controller and so on and so forth, and display it in the presentation layer. All right, so that's sort of the next step on setting up your Hibernate project. So it's pretty cool stuff. Stay tuned.